Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do. Now, why do we need this, right? What's the most important goal of this, right? Number one, goodness, gymnastics is hard, right? Like in the last 10 to 15 years, it has gotten so much harder. It's impossible for a gymnastics coach to do it all. And I empathize with gymnastics coaches, obviously being one. When you are on your own and you're trying to, balance all this stuff, you're getting questions about not only gymnastics technique and strength and conditioning and all that stuff, you're getting questions about injuries and mental health and emotional stuff and puberty and changing, right? All this stuff combined with, oh yeah, in the leotards, oh yeah, in the hotels, oh yeah, in the actual coaching, oh yeah, in the extra hours and the weekends, right? It is so hard for a gymnastics coach to do everything. And I think it's so important to make sure that we are getting this model evolved because of that aspect of not putting too much on one person, but it being so challenging that it's impossible for you to be able to do it without that, right? Two, it's so important for performance, right? How in the world can you expect someone to get the most out of their possible potential if you don't have an expertise in all the things that requires of it, right? So gymnastics, for example, like we said, the technical development, the actual doing the skills, the teaching the skills, when to do them, the progressions, the spotting, right? What coaches are experts in, but also strength and conditioning, right? The science of strength and conditioning is incredibly evolved and it's moving so fast, particularly for the sport of gymnastics, which is getting much more research and attention. You have to know how to program, right? Body weight conditioning for gymnastics specific stuff, but you also need to program external weightlifting now. You need to know these hybrid programs. You need to understand periodization and workloads and peaking and tapering, right? That's an entire career in itself as a strength coach. Not to mention, you have to be aware of what types of injuries might occur and how to prevent those and prehab and stuff as a medical provider has expertise in. You also need to understand about nutrition and sports psychology and energy systems and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot, man. It's really a lot. And I think it's naive to think that as an individual, right? Not even talking about a coach, but as an individual, like a medical provider or a strength coach, there's no way you're going to be really good at all those things, right? You might be extremely good at one of those and have a little bit of a side hustle in something else. Like for me, for example, like I feel like I'm a pretty good medical provider and I kind of have a little side hustle. I know strength and conditioning really well. I know gymnastics coaching really well. I know nothing about nutrition that could be, interventionally at a safe level, right? I know nothing about sports psychology that would make me an expert for that. So I have to defer all the time in athletes that I coach. And when I'm talking to people who have issues like that, I defer to my network of friends that I've developed to try to help them get in the right position to get the services they need, right? So that's because I want the athlete's performance to be the most big priority along with their health and wellness. And I'm naive, to say that I'm going to be the one who can fix all those things. So performance, if you really want the most out of, not only your own coaching to elevate your game, but also the athletes you work with, it's really more important to have this kind of separated, less direct model where everyone's working together. That's going to be better for the overall performance. Okay. Clearly, athlete health and wellness is going to benefit more when we have a variety of experts who are willing to put in the effort and kind of put the athlete first. That is clearly going to be the most important thing, right? And it's hard because sometimes you have someone who's an expert, quote unquote, but they don't really have the information specific to gymnastics that you need, or they're kind of a pseudo expert, whereas they may have a couple tips and tricks here and there, but they don't have a really good mastery of the concepts that they're supposed to be training in. So you need to make sure you're finding the right qualified people who are not only experts in their technical field or their area, but they're also willing to work on part of a team and not let their ego get wrapped into it, okay? And then lastly, I'm very aware of this, like I said, as someone who is a coach or as a medical provider. If we spread the load out across the demand for the athlete's care, it reduces the risk of burnout by any one person, right? Like I said, coaches are very commonly overloaded. They're often overworked and underpaid. So they get dumped all this stuff onto them. They don't know what's going on. They feel frustrated. And then of course, they get burnt out. But vice versa, that can happen with a medical provider who is being asked to get all the injuries looked at, write the strength program, and do the workload stuff, and talk to parents, and make sure you're talking with prehab programs for coaches, right? Like that's so much for someone to be on top of. So getting some of that kind of offloaded to a nutritionist, for example, or a strength coach or a gymnastics coach, and everybody kind of divides and conquers based on their expertise and what they're good at, but also what they want to be passionate about. It helps so much to make sure that person's not going to burn out by the end of the season. Okay. So number one, be a good human, right? All the exact same stuff. Someone who's compassionate, someone who listens, someone's really open to learning, open to new ideas. They're willing to communicate really well. They have good listening skills. But also is when you look more on the medical side, particularly for rehab professionals, you really want to find someone who's licensed medically with either a master's or a doctorate level of training, right? And most people fall into that, right? So athletic trainers, physical therapists, sports chiropractors, nurses, right? You want to find find people who have that level of training, because it really requires a significant amount of time and effort to be really technically proficient with the things that we're doing here. So because gymnastics is such a high risk sport, there's nothing wrong with getting a bachelor's degree and having an education and wanting to help out. But if you're prescribing medical care, you need to have a medical license, right? So I know it's easy sometimes to, follow magazine advice or blog advice or YouTube advice and stuff like that. But honestly, it's almost always going to do more harm than good, right? You want to make sure you're finding someone who is running those channels or those blogs and has a good license credentialing to go with that, right? So those are the things that is really important, because they're going to learn anatomy, physiology, sports rehab, right? Biomechanics, pathomechanics, injury mechanics. They're going to understand those things, and they're going to have a really good working knowledge of what that means for the athlete in front of you. It'd be really, really good if that person was a gymnast or understands gymnastics or works with a lot of gymnasts, obviously, but also people who are willing to learn make a massive, massive impact too. And the best example of this is my buddy Josh Eldridge. He's board certified. He's got his diplomate in sports chiropractor. He wasn't a gymnast at all, right? His wife was, and then his daughter came into gymnastics, and he really didn't have a ton of knowledge, but he just went there. He just went to practice. He said, hey, can I just sit here and listen and learn and ask questions with the coaches? The coach is like, yeah, by all means, absolutely. And over the course of multiple years, because he was so willing to put the work in and really understand it, he was able to apply his expert level of doctoral training and put it into gymnastics. And now he's one of the most respected gymnastics providers that we have in the field, right? So it's not about having to do gymnastics. It's about being willing to learn and put in the hours to study and understand what they're going through. So I don't want people to automatically kind of brush off people who didn't do gymnastics and say, oh, you don't get it. You never did gymnastics. You don't understand. It's a different perspective, but sometimes not having that experience is actually a good thing, because it forces them to really absorb all of the information from scratch. Okay. And you want someone who is constantly reading. You want someone who is constantly reading in the scientific evidence in the literature. I can't stress this enough, right? Another thing that's very, very concerning sometimes is the internet is a blessing and a curse. There is so much information out there and so many things to be a part of, but not all of it is sound, right? You can't just be reading headlines or reading abstract of articles and not really understanding the methods of those things, the statistical analysis, the implications of what that means, because it's very, very easy to say like, oh, well, this new study says, or, oh, hey, there's this blog that I read that talked about this research article. That doesn't mean that it's sound. It doesn't mean that it's always going to go well. So have to kind of have your ear to the ground to make sure you're understanding that that person is constantly looking at new science, new data. They're not just combing the abstract and pulling off headlines, but they really read it and they really understand it. And the person who does have a good grasp of the research will even be cautionary towards it. Say, I read the study and it had a few interesting points, but, we don't want to jump to conclusions. Just one study. It's a small sample size. You want to look at things that are broad, overarching principles across all of sports medicine. Okay. Ideally, this is not a necessary part of it, but ideally you would have someone who's also board certified in their field, right? So in physical therapy, we have things like an orthopedic certified specialist or a sports certified specialist, which is what I am. And also, some other things in sports chiropractic or AT. There are ways to become board certified to get a higher level than just the minimum. Not necessary, right? I know some phenomenal PTs that are literally just DPT. They don't have any things behind their name, but chances are the person who's board certified has really put in an extra 2 to 3 years of postdoctoral work to really crush, the thing that they're trying to go for sports or whatever else it is. So another really good bonus of a rehab provider is someone who is a strength coach as well. So, I'm a certified strength coach as well. And that's kind of helps me to put my my head in the other direction of when someone's more on the advanced rehab or the return to sport phase. So again, not a criteria that's make or break, like maybe the medical licenses, but really, really good to have in mind. Coach. So more and more strength coaches are getting involved in gymnastics. More teams are hiring strength coaches to come in and write their programming to help out with a hybrid model of weight training and also body weight specific programming. So for example, my buddy Dan Lonsdale goes to a lot of different gyms and they'll do the body weight kind of explosive, gymnastic specific stuff. He'll write the lifting and he'll write the strength programming and teach that and implement that and kind of make sure people are on the same page. So what does that look like, right? I'm not going to repeat it, but be a good person, right? That's more important. Okay, the biggest thing is that they're going to really understand the basics and the science of strength building and conditioning, which conditioning in this regard means like metabolic training or energy systems training, not just about like conditioning is what gymnastics thinks about, but they have a really good command of strength training, how to build strength, the difference of set and rep ranges and types of weight to use in programming, conditioning and different energy systems, but also how to use weights properly, how to, teach a squat, teach a hinge, teach a split squat, teach some pushing and pulling, program those things, what weight to use, what's a normal response to exercise, what's too much, and all that kind of stuff, right? They want to have someone who really gets that at a basic level, but is willing to apply that again to gymnastics, right? So they may be, someone who works with a lot of baseball players and track and field athletes and soccer players, but if they're willing to put in the work and really understand well what the sport demands, they can learn quite a bit and apply that to gymnastics, okay? The head strength and conditioning coach at Champion Physical Therapy and Performance, where I work, who has become an absolute master gymnastics strength coach. He knew nothing about gymnastics before 5 years ago, right? I walked in and I was a PT and he was like, oh, this is cool, gymnastics. And more we started getting gymnasts coming to lift with us and they wanted to have us do their performance programming, particularly during the summer. And he had to learn, he had to study, he had to listen, he had to watch videos, he had to go to practices, he had to watch meets, he had to just break it down. We've had so many really long conversations about what gymnastics needs. And now I think he's one of the best in the business. And, we made a course together, right? Peak Gymnastics Power was kind of our brainstorm together of how we run hybrid models, and it was wildly successful because of Duesh's expertise. So Dan's the same way. Dan just started talking with Nick, met Nick Ruddick one day and said, hey, I'd like to help out. I did rugby or I knew this, but Dan was a monster, right? And learned a lot. Duesh was a monster, learned a lot too. And so now they're two of the best in the business because they were willing to sit down and learn and do it. So just because they didn't do gymnastics doesn't mean they're not wildly valuable to the community. So again, don't write off strength coaches who maybe don't know gymnastics right away. Field them out and see if they're good people and if they're willing to learn. And you might have a diamond in the rough who's going to become one of the most important assets for your gym. Okay. Along with that, most strength coaches are going to have a bachelor's degree, which is their starting point. But if they do have a master's or something higher than that, like a doctorate, that's phenomenal. The kind of the gold standard here in America, anyways, is a certified strength and conditioning coach. So a CSCS is kind of more the gold standard academic. Again, not the worst case scenario if someone's not that, but just a little bit more academic combination and understands maybe reading research and stuff like that. So this person does also need to be up to date in the current science and literature. There's so much great evidence coming out in gymnastic strength and conditioning that if that person is up to date with that, whether they're reading articles or they're downloading them or they're going to conferences, whatever else it is, that person is going to be way ahead of the field and you're going to want that person in your back pocket. Focus on long-term relationships. There's too many people who are trying to get a short-term gain, whether it's monetary or publicity or fame or whatever you want to call it. It never works. The athletes always are the ones who suffer. So don't focus on the short-term investment. Focus on long-term investments, okay? I'm much more of a people over profits person, as you'll see here. And what I mean by that is that I care more about helping people in the short term and helping deliver high quality of service and trust and in relationships. The money comes down the road. I understand it's a business. You work in a gym, it's a business. You want to get paid as a coach. You run a clinic. I promise you, if you treat people well and you build good relationships long-term, the money will come in, right? I can't tell you how many people have gotten referred to me from their friends or a teammate or a parent group or whatever, just because they finally had a good experience and they were happy, right? And then, the money comes down the road as it is. If you go the other way and you talk about money and how much can we make and commissions and referral bonuses, like that goes right away real fast, right? I hate that stuff. So it's not that you can't talk about money, you can't make a profit. I obviously run a business, right? But I don't think that starting with the conversation of money is going to be good. It feels slimy, it feels gross. So go more on how can we help people, how can we help the athletes, and the money will work itself out.